morning and welcome to Vermont's first Laser. This is a Leonardo Art and Science Evening Rendezvous. My name is Jenn Karson and I am the chair of the Vermont Laser Committee and curator of the exhibition Behind the Schemes when Helen of Troy came to UVM. Tonight we celebrate a distinguished UVM collaboration. We will hear from Glynis Fox, John Franklin, and Creston Lee about their recent collaboration on the production of Euripides' Helen. Fleming Museum curator Andrea Rosen will guide us in a closing discussion, and we invite you to join us. For more information on tonight's speakers, we have a special webpage for you at go.uvm.edu/laser. There are also resources there that explain a little more about the Leonardo program. The work of these Vermonters is at the heart of a larger collaboration that included UVM faculty, staff, and students who are here, Vermont community members who are here, and it also included a choreographer, costume designers, actors, singers, artists, and musicians, and even a few engineering students who scanned one of the actors' faces and then made a 3D print of that scan. That's one of the artifacts that you can find upstairs in the exhibition. The exhibition Behind the Schemes, we'll be able to view that during the reception that follows. With tonight's program and with the exhibition, the Fleming Museum has become an important part of this story and collaboration. I believe that in the planning for both the program and the exhibition, I've interacted with every single person on the staff. And I also have, in terms of witnessing how the Fleming works, I just have great admiration for their collaboration and how they work. And I want to thank them very much for hosting us. Tonight, we will also welcome musicians who will perform live for us, and they were part of the performance as well. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and now we'll start with a performance.
Mothers and good did command, go forth all disgraces. Okay, thank you very much. I should introduce our performers. On the frame drum, or in Greek called the tympanon, is Jamie Levis, a great local musician. He's also a biochemist here at UVM. The singers were Julia Irons in the middle, who was Helen in the production, and Rachel Fickus and Alex Seiler on either side of her, who were not in the production, but agreed to join us here tonight to make a chorus again. Also like to thank all the chorus members from last year that are here in the audience that we had such a worked so hard with last year, and I know it was a lot of work for them all, but for me at least it was great. And I would also like to reiterate thanks to the Fleming for hosting us, for Jenn for thinking of this idea, for sort of bringing back some of the pieces of the production into this nice show in the front gallery, for Margaret, Andrea, Alice for helping in many different ways. Let's see, I think that's everybody else for coming, thank you. All my colleagues, we had 44 people involved in this show, translators, actors. The department put up with all kinds of stress last year, and so I'd like to thank them all very much for their collaboration. So, okay, I'll try to not talk forever about this, even though I tend to want to. Most Greek drama used a double oboe called the Greek alos. We did not use this for our play. We didn't have one then. We have one now. Actually, we have two pairs now. And Rachel, who's in the chorus, is currently learning to play them. With any luck, you will hear her again soon. We did, however, have a lyre. And not this one. We had another one. And also, the illustrations you see here are from Egypt and what's now Lebanon and Israel, Phoenicia or Canaan. And so these images represent ensembles that would have been current in the days that the play Helen was set, the dramatic setting of the play, the late Bronze Age in Egypt, or around 1200, 1100, somewhere around there. So even though we didn't have the authentic double oboe for the music, we were able to make a virtue of a necessity by sort of evoking the appropriate music for the period. The kind of instrument you see here is called a kinaru lyre. It's not from the Greek world, it's from the East. And that's what we ended up using for the show. There's Rachel playing. Oh, didn't realize it was going to start Rachel. She's wincing. Anyway, she's only been playing for 2 weeks, and that is a real, oboe is a hard instrument, that's 2 oboes. So she's making amazing progress. So anyway, we had this old Greek-style kithara that a former student, Tanner Lake, made some years ago, and it's a nice instrument. I wrote a lot of the music on it. It has gut strings, however, which are very unmanageable in performance. They go out of tune very easily. And also, I needed to be able to change tunings between songs, and I didn't want to leave the theater have the door clapped behind and all that. It was too distracting. And so I invited Creston Lee here, who you'll hear in a moment speaking. He's a virtuosic local guitar maker, to make what is effectively an electric guitar, but with the shape of this 14th century BC Canaanite instrument, and 7 strings, so that one can think like an ancient lyrist. But it doesn't have the problem of going out of tune like gut strings do, and you can turn the volume down between songs and retune, and nobody knows the difference. So it solved a lot of things in a blow. This little $20 lap harp I used for composing a lot of the music because I spent about 6 weeks in Cyprus that summer, and it fit in my backpack. And it was a terrible heat wave, too. So I have these memories of just sweltering in this Airbnb and playing that little okay, we know a fair amount about ancient music. I won't go into tons of detail, but we know in particular about the lyre and the alos both. I know most about the lyre, which is what I wanted to compose on. We know the names of the strings, for instance. We know the basic tuning that was common, your common opening tuning, the so-called Dorian. We know how that worked. We also know that the central string, so that's the one that's called messe in the middle, one of the red dots means middle, We know that that central string was the one that the others were tuned to, that melodies began from it, came back to it often. So it was kind of a tonal center, and it was repeated often like a virtual drone. It wasn't droning, but it was repeated enough to remind you where the tonal center of gravity was. So I had those two parameters with which to work. This is just a couple of, I started out thinking it would be neat to have little pictures of lyres showing the fingerings, but it ended up being much more work to do that than just to write the numbers in the score, which you'll see. But this gives you a sense of how it works. You finger the strings you don't want to hear. So it's the opposite of most instruments. With a piano chord, you hit C, E, and G, and you get a C major chord. But on a lyre, you have to hit all the other notes to get the C major chord. So it's a little counterintuitive. So the first, in the upper left, shows you what I call an open position. It's basically an A and an E. It's an open fifth. So you could put different modal colorings in there on an A tonal center. The one in the lower left is a second open position, an E and a B. So it's an adjacent key that the piece you heard is in, and the next piece will also be in. And then just two sample other combinations of strings, and how you search out the combinations and how you avoid triads, or whether you should avoid triads is a whole question. Another parameter we know about is that the surviving melodies, there's about 60 surviving melodies from ancient Greece in notated form. The surviving ones follow a well-defined custom of observing the pitch accent. Greek was a tonal language. That means it had pitch accents as part of the words that contributed to the meanings of the words. Pitch accent distinguished between two words that were otherwise the same. And the melodies that survive always show, they show patterns in relation to the accent. And we can walk through the specifics of that if you're interested. It's just a couple of simple rules. So with those sort of first principles that I just went through, I approached the composition of the music. I began with William Allen's edition of the play. An edition is one in which a scholar goes through the Greek text and makes decisions about what has been correctly transmitted, what has been corrupted, makes various interventions into an ancient text, which never comes down perfect. And part of their job is to come up with a metrical analysis of the choral passages, because all the choral passages are songs. And this is his metrical analysis of the song you just heard, the so-called second stasimon, the second stationary song by the chorus. After they come on, it's called the entry song or the parados, there's a number of songs on the stage, and what you heard was the second of the stasimon. So he had already done the work of analyzing it. There's opportunity to interpret a bit differently, maybe disagree with a few decisions, but by and large it's fairly straightforward because the words themselves have syllables which are either long or short. And by observing what those are, you end up with a scheme of shorts, which are represented by circles, half circles, or longs, which are dashes. And so the rhythm is really surviving in the text. And it's just a question of pulling it out. His analysis, or an editor's analysis, seeks to isolate intelligible musical phrases and pauses between phrases. So for instance, the double line at the end here, this double line here indicates he believes that's the end of a musical phrase. And everything up to there constitutes one musical entity. And that's a place one can disagree, but it's often fairly clear. So you've got your rhythmic score. And they're very complex rhythmically. They're sort of like Stravinsky or Bartók. They're non-recurrent, generally non-recurrent patterns that sort of wander from one place to the next. The next thing I did was so these two lines represent the strophe and antistrophe. That means you have a section of music that's played once and then repeated. Strophe is the first time, antistrophe the second time. And I wanted the same melody to fit both of them while also not violating the accent rules. And so that means the melody has to fit the accents of both repetitions. But the accents in the words are different from one to the next. So you need a melody that will work for both. So I took the accents from this one and wrote them up on the first line. That's a printed accent, and that's a handwritten accent that I transferred up. And I went through the whole thing like that, so that once I started composing, I knew it ended up being more efficient to combine them that way. So I started with that. And then you work from your first pitch, your tonal center, and you try different combinations that will follow that melodic contour. And for those of you that sang in this play, I want to just play you a couple of the starting possibilities that didn't end up getting used. because they're awful. So I started out here thinking I was going to do this in A. That's the fingering for A. And with this melody. The mountain mother of the gods once. Bland, not much there. Then I also got thinking, that's going to be really high. I think I'd like to lower it down a bit. So then I had this, the B and the A sharp, because the circumflex sometimes has a fall. So this was the mountain mother of, and I sort of ran out of room here, copied it over to here, said I need a B flat, not an A sharp, because I'm going down, if that's like proper music notation. So the mountain mother of the god, the mountain mother of the god once. I'm missing a key on here, and that's awful. And so I decided I liked some features of the first and some of the second, so I ended up with this octave leap in the beginning. And then it goes on to, but it used to be, and then it went, anyway, this is hard to play it on this crummy thing. So it's like that all throughout. When you see all these stacked things, I would sort of come up with all the combinations that might work, and then I would sort of circle ones and say, okay, that's a take, and I would combine it with the next one, and I'd sew them together like that. The other thing you see here is just the different chord symbols, the fingerings. Sometimes I got lazy and I just called it E minor or D or something that was roughly a modern chord, so I didn't have to count up the strings and say that's a 2, 3, 5, 6. It's going to be an E minor of some sort. I'll come back to that later. And yeah. So this was a 200% blow up of Alan's edition, and then what's in the gallery upstairs is a 200% blow up of that. And so I printed this out and took it with me to Cyprus and worked just hard copy. I guess I'll show you this one thing. This is an example of rhythmic interpretation. Normally you just have longs and shorts, but there's places in Greek meter where in the strophe you might have a short, but in the same place in the antistrophe it might be long. And then the question is it just different? And if so, that's a lot of little micro variations to keep track of. Another possibility is that these two, for instance, this space here, long, short versus long, long. The long, short would occupy the space of 3/8 notes. A long is 2, a short is 1. So long and short would be 2 plus 1, 3/8 notes. If the second time the two longs occupied that same space of 3/8 notes, they would have to be dotted 1/8 notes. So that's a way people do interpret. And with this particular piece, I went in that direction quite a lot because I observed that these circled lines are all more or less the same structure. They end with a dot, dee, dee, dot. Dot, dee, dee, dot, dot, dee, dee, dot, dot, dee, dee, dot. That seemed to be a repeated figure. And I thought if the first part could also be a repeated figure, then that would be nice because the repetition is effective for hooking an audience, hooking listeners. And it let me resolve a couple of problems. Here's one of those potential dotted areas in the third and fourth syllable. Same problem or same situation in the first and second. What if the first, second, third, and fourth were all dotted ones? Then, even though these are marked as long, they could still be dotted, and these could be dotted. And then you'd end up with dot, 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 dee, dot, 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 dot. And it's kind of a nice lively syncopation in modern terms, and it kind of pulled together those lines. So I don't know if it's right, but it's at least an improvement on Euripides. Okay, and then so the final product gets transferred to score paper for the singers. The translation, this was a collaboration with my colleague Mark Usher. We want, the Columbia Greek play every year is in Greek and they have surtitles, and that's neat and whatnot, but I didn't want the audience to be distracted. I wanted them to hear what the show really said. And so translating into English was essential. You need to translate the English in a way that it fits that ancient rhythm, which is totally doable. There's a lot of places where you have to think about, maybe the word you would normally choose is not going to work as well, it doesn't sing as well, or it doesn't match the rhythm as well, and then you have to go in a different direction. So it presents a lot of neat translation challenges and opportunities. And so it ends up looking like this. I put the chord symbols here for my own reminder. The initial tuning of the lyre, that's a vamp. This is just the lines in the text for reference. This is a place where I went low with the melody the first time and high the next time. It's the same shape in each case, so it follows the accents in both cases. But the second repetition goes higher and kind of enhances the musical drama. And I guess the last thing I'd say about the translation is there's different tricks you can do, but I always try to, if there's a vocable, that is a word in Greek that is like an ah, or something that doesn't bear sense, that is just a cry or some sound, keep that sound. Why change that? And keep it in the same exact place that it occurs originally. If there's personal names like Aphrodite, do whatever you can to keep it in that same exact place, because then you've at least got that much of the original sound patterning in the right place. The other thing that's important is to put the original phrases as much as possible on the original metrical phrases. If you've ever taken Greek or Latin, you know that the words can be very free and move around, and so when you put it into normal English, things can end up in very different places. But we know that the ancient composers looked for mimetic or imitative effects between rhythm and melody and the sense of the song. So it's not always possible to figure out what those are, but to play it safe, if you can put the content, the meaning, the semantic content in the same place that it originally was, you're going to capture more of that. So I always erred on the side of doing that at the expense of intelligibility. I mean, sometimes it was more intelligible than others. That's one of the main purposes that Glynis will talk about, that we use projections behind the lyrics, was so because they're going by very quickly and they're very complicated and they're alluding to cultural and mythological themes that are not familiar to modern audiences. So this was a way to say, in one 5-second picture, this is what's happening. And even if you don't get the reference, you've got a picture of a goddess on a mountaintop with a torch. And so it creates it sort of restores some of the lost meaning that audiences would have brought to the show with them. And I think that's about all I need to say.
Hello. John, you just said exactly what I would have said about those projections, that John asked me to do those drawings in order to evoke images that would have, or could possibly have been in the minds of the ancient audience. My other job on this project, the play, was to design costumes. So I did, starting with very rough sketches for all the characters, and this is one of them. And then Rachel Cosgrove, who is a dancer and maker of costumes, really made them come to life, and with some very dedicated students who worked a lot of after hours. And I was working for her at that point because her sewing skills are amazing. So for these costumes, I was thinking of like very basic. These are very basic drawings, but I had two ideas. One that on the far side is inspired by Minoan wall painting and the wall painting of Thera, and the other two are from archaic vase painting and sculpture, so more around the time that the play was written, like 5th, 6th century. I mean, the play is 421, right? But something like that. So these peplos costumes are closer to the time that the play was put on, and the Minoan costume was 1,000 years earlier. And talking to Rachel about what we could really do, she said, let's have them all wear those peplos, because 7 people to create fitted costumes with many layers would have been above me. So I knew how basically to make a peplos because of doing illustrations for Mireille Lee's book on ancient dress. So this is one of them. This dress is basically a tube with a belt. And But I wanted them to be more than, as you see in a lot of movies or other media of Greek anything. They look like they're wearing bed sheets. But from ancient arts, like this vase, the clothes were very detailed, with a lot of decoration and I think color. So that's why the image with color above. Here's another one where you can see the patterns on the borders of dresses, which would have represented a lot of time and work, and so wealth. I thought, how am I going to, with a very small budget and time, create this? So I figured out that I could stencil on borders, like you can buy this fabric tape, which is made out of fabric and doesn't have sticky stuff on it. We had to sew it all on. And then cut stencils out of mylar. So some of these are, I mean, all of them are direct reference from vase painting or Minoan wall painting. And I did most of these. Francie did a bunch of them back there. And so we then put these strips of, here's one of them down here, and painted through the stencil. Cut them all up with an X-Acto knife. Here's an image of the chorus and you can just barely see the borders on all their outfits, and the Helen costume have them. So they still have Greek white, but I wanted to introduce color into this also. Here they are with their veils twirling, and another twirl, and then Rachel allowed one Minoan costume, well actually two, for the character of Helen. And it's funny to have costumes from two different eras on the same stage, but we thought this is kind of a fantasy Bronze Age of the past, so that it would be just the thing. These are inspired directly from these wall paintings from Thera, so it's sometime around 1600 BC. And it's cool because it looks like she's just wearing a t-shirt with some fancy borders, which is exactly how we solved this with the multi-layer skirt. Here's another one. These are from the Saffron Gathering fresco. And this has 5 different layers of multi-colored and multi-patterned fabric, so which I'm sure represents incredible wealth of the wearer or whoever wanted this painted on the walls. So here's Julia in the white version of the costume. And I love the pose of this because it matches this. That was unintentional because I took all these photos from the projection booth where I was pressing go on the projections. Here's the black costume